Hello Class 2, I'm Phoebe and I'm Mrs Lucas's daughter. We thought it might be a fun idea for me to read you a story today, but don't worry, Mrs Lucas is just behind the camera.
Hello Class 2.
I'm going to read you an extract from one of my favourite children's books, Matilda by Roald Dahl. It's a story about a very clever girl who, with her classmates, overcome a huge bully, their horrible head teacher, Miss Trunchbull. So sit back, relax and enjoy. In the middle of the first week of Matilda's first term, Miss Honey said to the class, "I have some important news for you, so listen carefully. You too, Matilda, put that book down for a moment and pay attention." Small, eager faces looked up and listened. "It is the headmistress's custom," Miss Honey went on, "to take over the class for one period each week. She does this with every class in the school, and each week has a fixed day and a fixed time. Ours is always 2 o'clock on Tuesday afternoons, immediately after lunch. So tomorrow at 2 o'clock, Miss Trunchbull will be taking over for one lesson. I shall be here, of course, but only as a silent witness. Is that understood?" "Yes, Miss Honey," they chirruped. "A word of warning for you all," Miss Honey said. "The headmistress is very strict about everything. Make sure your clothes are clean, your faces are clean, and your hands are clean. Speak only when spoken to. When she asks you a question, stand up at once before you answer it. Never argue with her, never answer back, and never try to be funny. If you do, you will make her angry, and when the headmistress gets angry, you had better watch out. I am quite sure," Miss Honey said, "that she will be testing you on what you are meant to have learnt this week. And one more thing. A jug of water and a glass must always be on the table when the headmistress comes in. She never takes a lesson without that. Now, who will be responsible for seeing that it's there?" "I will," Lavender said at once. Already Lavender's scheming mind was going over the possibilities that this water jug job had opened up for her. She longed to do something truly heroic, if only she could come up with a brilliant plot. On the way home from school that afternoon, she began to mull over various possibilities, and when at last the germ of a brilliant idea hit her, she began to expand on it and lay her plans with care. Great skill would have to be exercised, Lavender told herself, and great secrecy observed if she was to come out of this exploit alive. There was a muddy pond at the bottom of Lavender's garden, and this was home of a colony of newts. The newt, although fairly common in English ponds, is not often seen by ordinary people because it is a shy and murky creature. It is an incredibly ugly, gruesome-looking animal, rather like a baby crocodile, but with a shorter head. It is quite harmless, but doesn't look it. It is about 6 inches long and very slimy, with a greenish-grey skin on top and an orange-coloured belly underneath. It is, in fact, an amphibian which can live in or out of water. That evening, Lavender went to the bottom of the garden, determined to catch a newt. They are swiftly moving animals and not easy to get hold of. She lay on the bank for a long time, waiting patiently until she spotted a whopper. Then, using her school hat as a net, she swooped and caught it. The next day she carried her secret weapon to school in her satchel. She was tingling with excitement. She was longing to tell Matilda about her plan of battle. In fact, she wanted to tell the whole class, but she finally decided to tell nobody. It was better that way, because then no one, even when put under the most severe torture, would be able to name her as the culprit. Immediately after lunch, she dashed off to the kitchen and found one of the Trunchbull's famous jugs. It was a large, bulging thing made out of blue glazed pottery. Lavender filled it half full of water and carried it, together with a glass, into the classroom and set it on the teacher's table. The classroom was still empty. Quick as a flash, Lavender got her pencil box from her satchel and slid open the lid just a teeny bit. With great care, she held the box over the neck of the jug and pulled the lid fully open and tipped the newt in. The deed was done. All was ready. Lavender put her pencils back into the rather damp pencil box and then joined the others in the playground until it was time for the lesson to begin. At 2 o'clock sharp, the class assembled, including Miss Honey, who noticed that the jug of water and the glass were in the proper place. Then she took up a position standing right at the back. Everyone waited. Suddenly in marched the gigantic figure of the headmistress in her belted smock and green breeches. "Good afternoon, children," she barked. "Good afternoon, Miss Trunchbull," they chirruped. The headmistress stood before the class, legs apart, hands on hips, glaring at the small boys and girls who sat nervously at their desks in front of her. "Not a very pretty sight," she said. Her expression was one of utter distaste, as though she was looking at something a dog had done in the middle of the floor. "What a bunch of nauseating little warts you are." Everyone had the sense to stay silent. "It makes me vomit," she went on, "to think that I am going to have to put up with a load of garbage like you in my school for the next 6 years. I can see that I'm going to have to expel as many of you as possible as soon as possible to save myself from going round the bend." She paused and snorted several times. It was a curious noise. You can hear the same sort of thing if you walk through a riding stable when the horses are being fed. "I suppose," she went on, "your mothers and fathers tell you you're wonderful. Well, I am here to tell you the opposite, and you'd better believe me. Stand up, everybody." They all got quickly to their feet. The Trunchbull began a slow march along the rows of desks. All went well until she came to a small boy in the second row. "What's your name?" she barked. "Nigel," the boy said. "Nigel what?" "Nigel Hicks," the boy said. "Nigel Hicks what?" the Trunchbull bellowed. She bellowed so loud she nearly blew the little chap out of the window. "That's it," Nigel said, "unless you want my middle names as well." "I do not want you middle names, you blister," the Gorgon bellowed. "What is my name?" "Miss Trunchbull," Nigel said. "Then use it when you address me. Now then, let's try again. What is your name?" "Nigel Hicks, Miss Trunchbull," Nigel said. "That's better," the Trunchbull said. "Now stay where you are, boy, while I test you on your spelling to see if you've learnt anything at all this past week. Now then, spell right." "Which one?" Nigel asked. "The thing you do with a pen, or the one that means the opposite of wrong?" He happened to be an unusually bright child, and his mother had worked hard with him at home on spelling and reading. "The one with the pen, you little fool." Nigel spelled it correctly, which surprised the Trunchbull. She thought she had given him a very tricky word, one that he would not let have learnt, and she was peeved that he had succeeded. Then Nigel said, "Miss Honey taught us how to spell a new word, very long, yesterday." "And what word was that?" the Trunchbull asked softly. The softer her voice became, the greater the danger, but Nigel wasn't to know this. "Difficulty," Nigel said. "Everyone in the class can spell difficulty now." "What nonsense," the Trunchbull said. "You were not supposed to learn long words like that until you were at least 8 or 9. And don't try to tell me everyone in the class can spell that word. You are lying to me, Nigel." "Test someone," Nigel said, taking an awful chance. "Test anyone you like." The Trunchbull's dangerous glittering eyes roved around the classroom. "You," she said, pointing at a tiny and rather daft little girl called Prudence. "Spell difficulty." Amazingly, Prudence spelled it correctly, and without a moment's hesitation. The Trunchbull was properly taken aback. She snorted. "And I suppose Miss Honey wasted the whole of one lesson teaching you to spell that one single word." "Oh, no, she didn't," piped Nigel. "Miss Honey taught it to us in 3 minutes, so we'll never forget it. She teaches us lots of words in 3 minutes." "And what exactly is this magic method, Miss Honey?" asked the headmistress. "I'll show you," piped up the Nigel again, coming to Miss Honey's rescue. "Miss Honey gives us a little song about each word, and we sing it together, and we learn to spell it in no time. Would you like to hear the song about difficulty?" "I should be fascinated," said Miss Trunchbull in a voice dripping with sarcasm. "Here it is," Nigel said. "Mrs. D, Mrs. I, Mrs. F, F, I, Mrs. C, Mrs. U, Mrs. L, T, Y. That spells difficulty." "How perfectly ridiculous," snorted the Trunchbull. "Why are all these women married? And anyway, you're not meant to teach poetry when you're teaching spelling. Cut it out in future, Miss Honey." "I shall now test the class on the multiplication tables to see if Miss Honey has taught you anything at all in that direction." The Trunchbull had returned to her place in front of the class, and her diabolical gaze was moving slowly along the rows of tiny pupils. "You," she barked, pointing at a small boy called Rupert in the front row. "What is 2 sevens?" 16, Rupert answered with foolish abandon. The Trunchbull started advancing, slow and soft-footed, upon Rupert, in the manner of a tigress stalking a small deer. Rupert suddenly became aware of the danger signals and quickly tried again. "It's 18, he cried. 2 sevens are 18, not 16. "You ignorant little slug," the Trunchbull bellowed. "You witless weed. You empty-headed hamster. You stupid glob of glue." She had now stationed herself directly behind Rupert, and suddenly she extended the hand the size of a tennis racket and grabbed all the hair on Rupert's head. She took a firm grip of Rupert's long golden tresses with her giant hand, and then, by raising her muscular right arm, she lifted the helpless boy clean out of his chair and held him aloft. Rupert yelled. He twisted and squirmed and kicked the air and went on yelling like a stuck pig. And Miss Trunchbull bellowed, 2 sevens are 14. You say 2 sevens are 14. I am not letting you go until you say it. 2 sevens are 14, gasped Rupert, whereupon the Trunchbull, true to her word, opened her hand and quite literally let him go. He was a long way off the ground when she released him, and he plummeted to earth and hit the floor and bounced like a football. "Get up and stop whimpering," the Trunchbull barked. Rupert got up and went back to his desk, massaging his scalp with both hands. The Trunchbull returned to the front of the class. The children sat there hypnotised. None of them had seen anything quite like this before. It was splendid entertainment. It was better than a pantomime, but with one big difference. In this room there was an enormous human bomb in front of them, which was liable to explode and blow someone to bits at any moment. The children's eyes were riveted on the headmistress. "I don't like small people," she was saying. "Small people should never be seen by anybody. They should be kept out of sight in boxes like hairpins and buttons. I cannot for the life of me see why children have to take so long to grow up. I think they do it on purpose. When you've been teaching for as long as I have, you'll realise that it's no good at all being kind to children. Read Nicholas Nickleby, Miss Honey, by Mr. Dickens. Read about Mr. Watford Squeers, the admirable headmaster of the Dotherby Hall. He knew how to handle the little brutes, didn't he? He knew how to use the birch, didn't he? He kept their backsides so warm you could have fried eggs and bacon on them. A fine book, that. But I don't suppose this bunch of morons we've got here will ever read it, by the look of them. They are never going to learn to read anything." "I've read it," Matilda said quietly. The Trunchbull flicked her head round and looked carefully at the small girl with dark hair and deep brown eyes sitting in the second row. "What did you say?" she asked sharply. "I said I've read it, Miss Trunchbull." "Read what?" "Nicholas Nickleby, Miss Trunchbull." "You are lying to me, madam," the Trunchbull shouted, glaring at Matilda. "I doubt there is a single child in this entire school who has read that book, and here you are, an unhatched shrimp sitting in the lowest form there is, trying to tell me a whopping great lie like that. Why do you do it? You must take me for a fool. Do you take me for a fool, child?" "Well," Matilda said. Then she hesitated. She would like to have said, "Yes, I jolly well do," but that would have been suicide. "Well," she said again, still hesitating, still refusing to say no. The Trunchbull sensed what the child was thinking and didn't like it. "Stand up when you speak to me," she snapped. "What is your name?" Matilda stood up and said, "My name is Matilda Wormwood, Miss Trunchbull." "Wormwood, is it?" the Trunchbull said. "In that case you must be the daughter of that man who owns Wormwood Motors." "Yes, Miss Trunchbull." "He's a crook," the Trunchbull shouted. "A week ago he sold me a second-hand car that he said was almost new. I thought he was a splendid fellow then, but this morning, while I was driving that car through the village, the entire engine fell out onto the road. The whole thing was filled with sawdust. The man's a thief and a robber. I'll have his skin for sausages, you see if I don't." "He's clever at his business," Matilda said. "Clever my foot," the Trunchbull shouted. "Miss Honey tells me that you are meant to be clever too. Well, madam, I don't like clever people. They are all crooked. You are most certainly crooked. Before I fell out with your father, he told me some very nasty stories about the way you behaved at home. But you'd better not try anything in this school, young lady. I shall be keeping a very careful eye on you from now on. Sit down and keep quiet." Matilda sat down again at her desk. The Trunchbull seated herself behind the teacher's table. It was the first time she had sat down during the lesson. Then she reached out a hand and took hold of her water jug. Still holding the jug by the handle, but not lifting it yet, she said, "I have never been able to understand why small children are so disgusting. They are the bane of my life. They are like insects. They should be got rid of as early as possible. We get rid of flies with fly spray and by hanging up fly paper. I have often thought of inventing a spray for getting rid of small children. How splendid it would be to walk into this classroom with a gigantic spray gun in my hands and start pumping it. Or better still, some huge strips of sticky paper. I would hang them all around the school and you'd all get stuck to them, and that would be the end of it. Wouldn't that be a good idea, Miss Honey?" "If it's meant to be a joke, headmistress, I don't think it's a very funny one," Miss Honey said from the back of the class. "You wouldn't, would you, Miss Honey?" the Trunchbull said. "And it's not meant to be a joke. My idea of a perfect school, Miss Honey, is one that has no children in it at all. One of these days I shall start up a school like that. I think it will be very successful." "The woman's mad," Miss Honey was telling herself. "She's round the twist. She's the one who ought to be got rid of." The Trunchbull now lifted the large blue porcelain water jug and poured some water into her glass. And suddenly, with the water, out came the long slimy newt straight into the glass. Plop! The Trunchbull let out a yell and leapt off her chair, as though a firecracker had gone off underneath her. And now the children also saw the long, thin, slimy, yellow-bellied lizard-like creature twisting and turning in the glass, and they squirmed and jumped about as well, shouting, "What is it? Oh, it's disgusting! It's a snake! It's a baby crocodile! It's an alligator! Look out, Miss Trunchbull!" cried Lavender. "I'll bet it bites!" The Trunchbull, this mighty female giant, stood there in her green breeches, quivering like a blancmange. She was especially furious that someone had succeeded in making her jump and yell like that, because she prided herself on her toughness. She stared at the creature, twisting and wiggling in the glass. Curiously enough, she had never seen a newt before. Natural history was not her strong point. She hadn't the faintest idea what this thing was. It certainly looked extremely unpleasant. Slowly she sat down again in her chair. She looked at this moment more terrifying than ever before. The fires of fury and hatred were smouldering in her small black eyes. "Matilda!" she barked. "Stand up!" "Who, me?" Matilda said. "What have I done?" "Stand up, you disgusting little cockroach." "I haven't done anything, Miss Trunchbull. Honestly, I haven't. I've never seen that slimy thing before." "Stand up at once, you filthy little maggot." Reluctantly, Matilda got to her feet. She was in the second row. Lavender was in the row behind her, feeling a bit guilty. She hadn't intended to get her friend in trouble. On the other hand, she was certainly not about to own up. "You are a vile, repulsive, repellent, malicious little brute," the Trunchbull was shouting. The Trunchbull was in such a rage that her face had taken on a boiled colour, and little corners of her flecks of froth were gathering in the corners of her mouth. But she was not the only one who was losing her cool. Matilda was also beginning to see red. She didn't in the least mind being accused of having done something she had actually done. She could see the justice of that. It was, however, a totally new experience for her to be accused of a crime that she had definitely not committed. She had absolutely nothing to do with that beastly creature in the gas. By golly, she thought that rotten Trunchbull isn't going to pin this one on me. "I did not do it," she screamed. "Oh, yes, you did," the Trunchbull roared back. "Nobody else could have thought of a trick like that. Your father was right to warn me about you." "I'm telling you, I did not do it," Matilda screamed. "I've never seen a creature like that in my life." "You have put a crocodile in my drinking water," the Trunchbull yelled back. "There is no worse crime in the world against headmistress. Now sit down and don't say a word. Go on, sit down at once." "And I'm telling you to shut up," the Trunchbull roared. "If you don't shut up at once and sit down, I shall remove my belt and let you have it with the end that has the buckle." Slowly Matilda sat down. Oh, the rottenness of it all. The unfairness. How dare they expel her for something she hadn't done? Matilda felt herself getting angrier and angrier and angrier and angrier, so unbearably angry that something was bound to explode inside her very soon. The newt was still squirming in the tall glass of water. It looked horribly uncomfortable. The glass was not big enough for it. Matilda glared at the Trunchbull. How she hated her. She glared up at the glass with the newt in it. She longed to march up and grab the glass and tip the contents, newt and all over the Trunchbull's head. She trembled to think what the Trunchbull would do to her if she did that. The Trunchbull was sitting behind the teacher's table, staring with a mixture of horror and fascination at the newt wriggling in the glass. Matilda's eyes were also riveted on the glass, and now, quite slowly, there began to creep over Matilda a most extraordinary and peculiar feeling. The feeling was mostly in the eyes. A kind of electricity seemed to be gathering inside them. A sense of power was brewing in those eyes of hers. A feeling of great strength was settling itself deep inside her eyes. But there was also another feeling, which was something else altogether, and which she could not understand. It was like flashes of lightning. Little waves of lightning seemed to be flashing out of her eyes. Her eyeballs were beginning to get hot, as though vast energy was building up somewhere inside them. It was an amazing sensation. She kept her eyes steadily on the glass, and now the power was concentrating itself in one small part of each eye, and growing stronger and stronger, and it felt as though millions of tiny little invisible arms with hands on them were shooting out of her eyes towards the glass she was staring at. "Tip it," Matilda whispered. "Tip it over." She saw the glass wobble. It actually tilted backwards a fraction of an inch, then righted itself again. She kept pushing at it with all those millions of invisible little arms and hands that were reaching out from her eyes, feeling the power that was flashing straight from the two little black dots in the very centre of her eyeballs. "Tip it," she whispered again. "Tip it over." Once more the glass wobbled. She pushed harder still, willing her eyes to shoot out more power, and then very, very slowly, slowly, she could hardly see it happening, the glass began to lean backwards, farther and farther and farther backwards, until it was balancing on just one edge of its base, and there it teetered for a few seconds, before finally toppling over and falling with a sharp tinkle onto the desktop. The water in it and the squirming newt splashed out all over Miss Trunchbull's enormous bosom. The headmistress let out a yell that must have rattled every window pane in the building, and for the second time in the last 5 minutes she shot out of her chair like a rocket. The newt clutched desperately at the cotton smock where it covered the great chest, and there it clung with its little claw-like feet. The Trunchbull looked down and saw it, and she bellowed even louder, and with a swipe of her hand she sent the creature flying across the classroom. It landed on the floor beside Lavender's desk, and very quickly she ducked down and picked it up and put it in her pencil box for another time. A newt, she decided, was a useful thing to have around. Thank you very much for listening to that, Class 2. Now go and enjoy yourself and think about what pranks you can get up to.